Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the show where we take a monumental stack of sources, articles, research papers, sometimes very esoteric texts that all point to a single idea, and we just break it down for you.
And today,
Ah.
today we are strapping in for what is, I think, arguably the most comprehensive, radical, and, outrageous framework we have ever tackled.
We're talking about the theory known as the Saturn Death Cult.
This deep dive really demands a complete mental reset from you. Our sources define this not as just a simple theory, but as a totalizing, all-encompassing narrative.
It's a framework that tries to unify mythology, astrophysics, and sociology into one single, massive, cohesive story.
Exactly. It basically posits a forgotten history for our solar system, a completely different history that allegedly explains the entire architecture of modern civilization.
It proposes nothing less than that our ancient ancestors, they lived under a completely different sky, and that the trauma of that sky collapsing is why the world operates the way it does today.
It's a huge claim.
It's a massive claim. And our mission here is to provide an objective, exhaustive analysis of this idea. We're going to synthesize all its incredibly diverse claims into a clear, navigable narrative for you. We are here to understand this theory on its own terms, strictly using the source material we've been given.
Yeah, and to really get the scale of this deep dive, you have to understand it's not a singular idea. It's what the sources call a complex bricolage of alternative to science and esoteric history.
Bricolage.
Yes, it weaves together three really distinct, heavy intellectual streams that, when you combine them, create this radical new vision of reality.
Okay, so what's the first stream?
The first is catastrophic celestial mechanics. This builds heavily on the controversial work of people like Immanuel Velikovsky and later David Talbot.
Right, and the fundamental idea there is that planetary orbits, far from being stable for billions of years, have changed radically and within human memory.
Yes, that's the shocker. And the second stream provides the how. It's the electric universe or plasma cosmology.
This is where gravity kind of takes a backseat.
A huge backseat. This framework basically replaces gravity with electromagnetism as the primary shaping force of the universe. It argues that massive electrical discharges, not slow-moving gravity, cause all the big cosmic changes.
And then the third stream, this is where the cult part of the name comes in.
Right. This is the conspiratorial sociology from authors like Troy McLaughlin. This is the part that links these ancient cosmic disasters directly to the origins of debt-based financial systems, ritual sacrifice, and the alleged hidden control of a modern occult elite.
Okay, so you have these three huge ideas. What's the radical central premise that unites them?
It's this. Earth once orbited Saturn, and Saturn was, at the time, a brown dwarf star.
A different sun.
A different, older sun. And this is during a primordial, almost paradisiacal golden age. The modern world we inhabit, with its debt, its wars, its religious symbols, is defined entirely by the psychological and physical trauma of that original Saturnian system's catastrophic collapse.
A truly different world, then. Shattered by a celestial event that proponents claim we are still, psychologically and socially reacting to today.
And unpacking this forgotten history is, according to these sources, the key to decoding the matrix of modern civilization.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the impossible physics of this golden age.
Mm-hmm.
We have to begin with the concept that is, I think, the hardest to grasp, the primordial world. This entire theory rests on a foundation of what they call revisionist astronomy.
It has to, because it completely rejects the uniformitarian view, the idea that the solar system has always operated exactly as it does now.
Right. Our sources are arguing that planetary orbits have changed radically, maybe as recently as 10,000, 12,000 years ago.
That's not eons ago. That is literally within the timeline of recorded human memory.
That's the key. So the first revolutionary idea is the brown dwarf thesis. Talk about that.
Okay, so Saturn in this model wasn't just a big gas giant like we see it today. It was a sub-brown dwarf star.
A failed star.
A failed star. Exactly. It didn't have the mass to kick off nuclear fusion, but it was still, it was hot enough to radiate its own gentle heat and, crucially, its own light. And this light came from its incredibly extensive plasma sphere.
And Earth was positioned right inside this protective sphere.
That's the claim. Earth was supposedly orbiting inside Saturn's massive, glowing plasma sheath. But the positioning wasn't the kind of orbit we think of today. The theory demands a really unique orbital dynamic they call the polar configuration.
This is the part that just throws standard physics right out the window. Tell us about this configuration.
Okay, so instead of orbiting on an equatorial plane like we do around the sun, Earth was locked in a collinear alignment,
Meaning in a straight line.
a straight line, suspended directly below Saturn's south pole. So from Earth's vantage point, Saturn would have looked massive, filling a huge portion of the sky, and most importantly, it was stationary. It was perpetually fixed at the celestial North Pole.
Wait, okay, so a massive planet, just sitting rigidly in place, holding other planets in a line, and somehow defying the gravitational pull of the actual sun, which is out there somewhere. I mean, that sounds completely unstable.
It does.
How do they even begin to justify that? A non-gravitational alignment.
This is where the electric universe framework becomes absolutely foundational to the whole Saturn theory. Proponents argue the stability is maintained not by gravity, which, weakens with the square of the distance,
Right.
but by electromagnetism, which weakens much more slowly. They justify this using observable plasma phenomena, specifically the forces that create things like Herbig-Haros objects in space.
Which are like jets of matter, right?
Exactly, where matter is being channeled. They argue the planets and stars aren't isolated spheres. They're more like beads on a string along these massive galactic transmission lines. They call them Birkeland currents.
Okay, so for anyone who's not familiar, a Birkeland current is
What?
like an invisible electrical cable in space.
That's a great way to put it. An invisible, highly structured, twisted cable of electric charge that spans immense cosmic distances.
And these currents are what kept the configuration rigid.
Precisely. The theory highlights the attractive forces generated by these currents, specifically something called the Z-pinch effect.
The Z-pinch.
Yeah. When electric currents flow through plasma, they generate a magnetic field. And that field compresses or pinches the current channel inward. They argue this electromagnetic pinch is powerful enough to hold celestial bodies in a rigid linear alignment, overcoming the standard gravitational forces that would otherwise just cause the system to scatter.
So that linear electromagnetically sustained configuration, that's the bedrock of the Golden Age's stability.
That's the bedrock.
Okay. So if the physics allows for this impossible alignment, what was the actual daily reality like for the ancients?
Let's talk about the Purple Dawn environment. If Earth was inside Saturn's plasma sheath, what did the sky even look like? No sun, no stars, right? That's correct. The sources describe an environment of soft, diffused light, like perpetual twilight.
Yeah.
But bathed in this uniform, hazy violet or red glow.
Wow.
The plasma sheath of Saturn was opaque to the outside. It blocked the distant harsh light of Sol, and it masked all the stars.
Yeah.
There was no night-day cycle as we know it. No single bright point of light moving across the sky.
That sounds almost unsettlingly calm. And what about the climate?
The climate was utopian.
Yeah.
Literally. Heat was radiated evenly from the surrounding plasma cocoon.
Yeah.
And that created a pole-to-pole greenhouse effect that eliminated climatic zones entirely.
No seasons.
No seasons, no extreme weather, no deserts, no polar ice caps. This constant, gentle, even warmth is repeatedly cited as the explanation for the fossil record's notorious gigantism.
Ah, the megafauna.
The megafauna, the megaflora, these massive creatures and plants that thrive globally, even places that are now tundra, because the climate was perfectly temperate everywhere.
So if the external world was hyper-fertile and calm, what were the claims about human adaptation to this environment?
Proponents suggest profound biological adaptations. First, the Saturnian sheath environment naturally suppressed damaging UV radiation, which allowed early hominids to exist and thrive without the harsh evolutionary pressure of Sol's intensity.
Okay.
Second, the low-light, purple-earth spectrum environment adapted early humans in very specific ways. A key piece of evidence they cite is the alleged human circadian rhythm drift.
Explain that, Drift.
Okay, so studies on human sleep cycles in isolation. They often suggest that when you're left unchecked by external light cues, the human body naturally tends toward a rhythm slightly longer than 24 hours, closer to 25.
I've heard that.
The Saturn theory suggests this subtle 25-hour cycle isn't a coincidence or a modern artifact. It's a residual biological adaptation to the Saturnian day. It's a biological echo of the Golden Age.
So everything was just fundamentally different. Now let's visualize this great conjunction, the fixed spectacle. The Saturnian system wasn't just one monolithic object. It was a hierarchy, right? A celestial totem pole visible on its face.
Yes, the fixed spectacle formed a clear hierarchy, which the ancients then interpreted mythologically. If you look at the polar configuration hierarchy in the sources, it describes a very specific, layered alignment that remained visible day in and day out. It was the ultimate, inescapable deity.
Saturn was the backdrop.
Saturn was the massive, unmoving sphere, the foundation, the universal monarch, the all-father, known as Kronos, or the motionless sun Adam-Ra in Egypt. Its position dictated everything.
And next layer down.
Centered directly inside Saturn's face was Venus. And because of all the electrical stress and discharge, Venus appeared as a smaller but intensely radiant star, a secondary deity,
The Great Mother.
consistently archetyped as the Great Mother, the Queen of Heaven, or the Eye of Heaven known as Ishtar.
And Mars, the smallest, sits right at the center of Venus.
Correct. Mars, described often as a red, dust-covered orb, was positioned right in the middle of that bright Venusian disk. And this is the most dynamic element, archetyped as the warrior hero, the pupil of the eye, or, crucially, the Son of God.
With Earth as the footstool, looking up at this divine family portrait.
That's the picture they paint.
It's a fascinating visual. And the spectacle wasn't totally static even during the Golden Age. The sources detail the evolution of the view.
Indeed. It wasn't always so radiant. Phase 1 was the quiescent Golden Age itself. Saturn was a stable, dim, golden or purple disk. The system was peaceful.
Okay.
Then came Phase 2, the activation. As the system began to move and near the sun's heliosphere, the electrical stress increased. Venus, acting like a massive anode or cathode in the discharge, started to glow brilliantly. It morphed into the mythological symbol of the eight-pointed star, a radiant jewel on Saturn's face.
And the final phase, just before the world broke, that's where the visual phenomenon turned terrifying.
That was Phase 3, the instability. As the galactic electrical current intensified, massive plasma discharge streamers, the visible Birkeland currents, began stretching and arcing between the planets in the configuration.
So these were allegories. They were towering, glowing, filamentary structures that you could actually see from Earth.
That's the claim. The ancients didn't see electrical currents. They interpreted these towering structures as the world mountain, like Mount Olympus, or the sacred cosmic tree, like Yggdrasil.
Or the ladder to heaven.
Or the ladder to heaven. It was a magnificent, terrifying, unstable sight that, according to the theory, warned them of the imminent end of the world they knew.
If the Golden Age was defined by stability and this fixed, luminous spectacle, this next section covers the event that shattered everything. The introduction of time, seasons, the terror of history. This is the celestial cataclysm. Here's where it gets really interesting.
To get from the calm of the Saturnian system to the chaos of our current Sol system, the theory needs a catastrophic, short-duration event. They call it the doomsday mechanism.
And mechanically, this is described as the collision of two plasma sheaths.
Yes. The entire Saturnian system, as it moved through the galaxy, intersected the heliosphere, the plasma sheath of our current sun, Sol.
So you have two massive electrical domains, each with a different electrical potential, touching for the first time. What does plasma physics predict happens when two highly charged areas meet?
When two plasmas of different potentials touch, a double layer forms, and it acts like a capacitor. Eventually, that double layer just can't hold the potential difference, and it breaks down,
Resulting in
a sudden, massive electrical equalization, a cosmic electrical short circuit. That's the underlying physics for the whole celestial upheaval.
And the immediate physical result was a blinding flash destroying that purple sky.
Absolutely. Saturn, which had been glowing gently, was suddenly hit with the immense electrical stress of the sun's field. It flared up into a nova-like state, temporarily increasing its luminosity exponentially.
And this sudden blinding light.
Proponents interpret this as the true, literal meaning of the Genesis command, "Let there be light." It wasn't the creation of the universe, it was the illumination of Earth's sky, as the protective plasma sheath was either violently stripped away or instantaneously rendered transparent.
And that means, for the very first time, our current sun, Sol, appeared.
Correct. The shock of the sun becoming visible for the first time was instantaneous and traumatic. To the ancients, Sol was perceived as this blinding, burning new killer sun, aggressive and destructive compared to the old, gentle, diffused warmth of Saturn. This shock of illumination and heat redefined the planetary environment instantly.
This electrical shock didn't just light up the sky, it physically broke the structural integrity of the polar configuration. The electromagnetic lock was severed. The planets started interacting chaotically.
And this is the origin story of cosmic warfare. It is the celestial titanomachy.
The wars of the gods.
The theory holds this is the literal origin of the wars of the gods' mythologies. Mars and Venus were seen to oscillate wildly, erratically, spinning around Saturn's face before being cast out into their current orbits. This celestial dance is the source of the Greek battle between the Titans and the Olympians.
Ra versus Apep in Egypt.
The struggle of Ra against the dragon Apep, or the conflicts between the Devas and Asuras in Hindu tradition. The gods were, quite literally, fighting above their head.
And their weapons were Cosmic mega lightning.
Massive interplanetary lightning discharges burst between the approaching highly charged planets. These terrifying visual events, far exceeding any terrestrial storm, were mythologized as the ultimate weapons of the gods.
Zeus's thunderbolt.
Zeus's thunderbolt, Thor's hammer Mjolnir, the Vajra of Indra. Proponents stressed these weren't just symbols, they were the physical manifestation of this electrical equalization event.
No, I have to inject some friction here. If planets were firing electrical discharges powerful enough to be mythologized as Zeus's thunderbolt, where's the physical evidence on Earth? Why is our geology defined by slow erosion and plate tectonics, not instant catastrophic scarring?
Well, that is the core claim of the electric universe. The geological evidence claims rely on the concept of electric discharge machining, or EDM. Proponents suggest this cosmic mega-lightning carved large geological features,
Like the Grand Canyon.
like the Grand Canyon, or the massive Valles Marineris on Mars. They argue these are not erosion features that formed over eons, but electric discharge machining scars. The immense electrical force just vaporized the rock instantly.
So the argument is that standard geological dating is completely wrong because the features we attribute to slow processes were actually formed instantaneously by electricity.
Yes, they argue this explains anomalies in geology, like the shape and distribution of craters. According to EDM, craters on the Moon and Mars aren't from asteroid impacts.
Okay.
They're often perfectly circular because electrical discharge strikes a surface at a 90-degree angle, regardless of the angle of approach. And they tend to form in chains because the electric current travels in lines. It's a complete inversion of established planetary science.
Let's discuss another foundational myth that this theory completely inverts, the Tower of Babel.
This is a spectacular reinterpretation. The theory views the Tower of Babel not as a brick structure built by boastful humans, but as a colossal, spectacular natural plasma phenomenon.
A plasma column.
A massive, twisted filament of glowing plasma, a colossal Birkeland current that temporarily connected Earth to the retreating Saturn. It would have looked exactly like a monumental, impossibly high tower reaching into the heavens, visible to the entire hemisphere.
And the recognizable stacked shape of the ziggurats, the historical structures that inspired the Babel legend that's also explained by plasma physics.
That's the most compelling part of this specific claim. Plasma physicists study phenomena known as Peratt instabilities.
Right.
For you, the listener, imagine a column of plasma twisting up like a tornado, but it's highly charged electricity. Under high-energy conditions, this column naturally evolves into a series of stacked toroidal shapes, like a stack of distinct glowing donuts.
So it looks like a stepped pyramid.
It visually matches the geometry of the ancient stepped pyramids and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia perfectly, suggesting they were monuments built to mimic the column they saw in the sky.
And the narrative ends with the tower's collapse and the confusion of tongues.
The current was eventually severed, the plasma column disappeared, the tower collapsed. The confusion of tongues is thus viewed as a metaphor. It symbolizes the shattering of the unified global culture, the breakdown of the unified Golden Age consciousness that had been shared under the fixed Saturnian sky.
And finally, the universal myth of the deluge, the global flood. How does the collapse of the polar configuration account for oceans sweeping across continents?
The catastrophic system realignment caused Earth to tilt dramatically on its axis. This event broke the immense tidal and electrical lock it had maintained with the massive nearby Saturnian sphere.
So the pole that was holding the oceans in place was just gone.
Suddenly gone. This rapid release and rebalancing of forces led to the violent surging of the oceans, the global flood narratives found in every culture, from Gilgamesh to Genesis.
And there's a specific variation about where the water itself came from.
Yes. The theory notes the possibility of a water canopy. Proponents suggest that the plasma sheath itself contained significant moisture. And when the sheath broke down and became transparent, this massive atmospheric moisture load precipitated,
Literally opening the windows of heaven.
contributing to the great downpour described in the flood accounts. It was an end-to-end destruction of the primordial world.
So if the sky was performing these dramatic physical acts, then the resulting mythologies, they weren't invented. They were attempts at recording history.
This is a fundamental paradigm shift required by the theory. Proponents argue that the impossible supernatural events in ancient texts, gods fighting with thunderbolts, cosmic serpents, heroes being cast out, are literal, albeit poetically described observations of celestial phenomena.
That were witnessed globally before they just ceased to exist.
Exactly. And the pantheons of gods, therefore, are simply planets, anthropomorphized.
We see this most clearly in the universal archetypes of Saturn. Every major civilization across the planet remembers a first king or a god who ruled a peaceful golden age before eventually being retired or deposed or going silent.
Right, let's look at the cross-cultural universality of this figure, the first king.
In Rome,
It was Saturn, who ruled Laudium in the idyllic Golden Age. In Greece, it was Kronos, the ruler before the chaotic ascent of Zeus. In Egypt, Atum-Ra, the primordial motionless sun at the zenith.
Sumer had Anu.
Anu, the high god of the sky and the great father. And in Mesoamerica, you see echoes in Quetzalcoatl, who promised to return after his departure.
So the conclusion, according to the theory, is that these are all the same entity. The planetary body, Saturn observed from different cultural vantage points while it dominated the polar configuration. The myth is the memory.
And the memory isn't just about the king, it's about the visual symbol of the entire hierarchy, which brings us to one of the most persistent and enigmatic symbols in occultism and religion, the all-seeing eye.
The Eye of Horus, the eye on the dollar bill, the Eye of Ra. Standard Egyptology attributes this to the sun or moon, but this theory provides a geometrically precise explanation rooted in that alignment.
It relates directly back to the hierarchy of the Great Conjunction we detailed earlier. The eye is the configuration staring down at Earth. You had Saturn as the massive background sphere. That's the sclera.
The white of the eye.
Then you had Venus, the smaller, intensely radiant white star centered on it. That's the iris. And Mars was the red orb centered within Venus, the pupil.
So the Venus-Mars-Saturn arrangement formed the perfect pupil-iris-sclera geometry.
The perfect eye.
That's an incredibly specific claim. What about the radiating lines often seen in symbols, like the Eye of Horus, the elaborate eyelashes, or the sunburst?
Those are explained by the electrical phenomena of Phase 3. During periods of intense electrical discharge, the plasma filaments, the streamers radiating outward from the Venus-Mars center toward the edge of Saturn, matched the visual appearance of eyelashes, or the sunburst patterns, perfectly. The symbol is a snapshot of an active cosmic discharge event.
And because the system was fixed perpetually at the celestial North Pole, it earned the title of the Watcher, or the Omniscient God.
The symbolism is clear. The fixed northern position meant this Watcher was omniscient. It was constantly staring down at the Earth day and night, an inescapable judge that dictated morality and fate. This fixed, all-seeing gaze cemented its mythological power across every culture that witnessed it.
Let's shift now to the iconography of the horned god and the dragon. How does a massive, glowing planet of Saturn transform into something as earthy as a bull?
This transition happens when the Saturnian system was being captured by Sol and began to tilt relative to the new sun. Because the light source, Sol, was now external, only the illuminated side of Saturn was visible from Earth, and it appeared as a bright crescent shape.
So the appearance depended entirely on the angle of illumination and rotation.
Exactly. When the crescent appeared at the bottom of the sphere, it was mythologized as a solar bark or a celestial ship, a vessel carrying the god, often Mars or Venus, across the sky.
But when that crescent appeared at the top of the sphere, it formed the horns of a bull.
This is the alleged origin of the horned god archetype Moloch, Apis, the sacred bull of heaven, Shiva's crescent moon. All figures consistently associated with the Saturnian deities, with governance, and with sacrifice. It was simply Saturn in its illuminated crescent phase, seen globally.
And finally, the universal enemy in virtually every myth, the dragon or chaos monster.
The dragon or serpent archetype Tiamat, Python, Apep, is described as a direct, terrifying depiction of the plasma instabilities.
So not a metaphor.
Not a metaphor. When the electrical energy surged, the massive discharge around Saturn would manifest as a toroidal discharge ring, a glowing serpent eating its own tail, the Ouroboros, literally encircling the world. This ring of chaos was often depicted as the enemy of the stabilizing hero, which was Mars.
So the famous stories St. George versus the dragon, Apollo versus Python, are interpreted as literal retellings of the planet Mars oscillating back and forth across Saturn's face while it was surrounded by these unstable filamentary plasma discharges.
That's the interpretation. It turns history into a physics lesson. These narratives, the proponents argue, are not metaphors for internal struggles, but accurate records of celestial combat witnessed by a world transitioning violently out of the purple dawn and into the Sol system.
The Saturn Death Cult theory would be dismissed as pure mythology if it didn't lean so heavily on the science it claims to validate it, the electric universe model. Now, we need to place this entire theory in the context of that larger EU discussion and, critically, provide the necessary scientific counterbalance demanded by our objective analysis.
The narrative really begins with the intellectual figurehead, Immanuel Velikovsky, and his revolutionary 1950 book, Worlds in Collision.
Right.
Velikovsky first shattered the uniformitarian assumption by proposing that massive celestial events, specifically that Venus was born as a comet from Jupiter and had violent interactions with Earth and Mars in historical times, were responsible for major shifts in history and mythology.
And the reaction to Velikovsky, which became known as the Velikovsky Affair, was notoriously fierce. This is an important piece of context for the theory's adherents.
It was incredibly severe. Proponents of this theory view the intense backlash, which included concerted efforts to boycott his publisher, not as simple scientific peer review, but as the active suppression of a dangerous truth by an entrenched academic establishment.
They often cite the 1974 AAO's conference as a show trial.
Yes, where prominent scientists like Carl Sagan critiqued him. They see it as an attempt to professionally silence dissenting ideas about planetary history.
Despite the controversy, adherents claim he was vindicated on several points later discovered by space missions.
Yes, the claims of vindication are essential to the theory's momentum. They note specific predictions Velikovsky made that were later confirmed by space probes, like the unexpectedly high heat of Venus.
Which was a surprise.
A huge surprise. Also, the radio noise from Jupiter, and the fundamentally electrical nature of comets, all ideas that contradicted the prevailing wisdom of the 1950s. They see this partial confirmation as proof that the catastrophic electrical model of celestial mechanics is superior to the gravitational one.
Let's delve deeper into the actual physics of the electric universe model. We mentioned it posits that gravity is a secondary player, but we need to understand the scale of that claim.
The core of the EU model is a fundamental challenge to standard cosmology. Since 99% of the visible universe is plasma and electrically charged, conducting gas EU theorists argue that electromagnetic forces, which are vastly orders of magnitude stronger than gravity on small scales, must be the dominant force structuring stars, galaxies, and planetary interactions.
They argue gravity is just too weak and too slow.
Too weak and slow to organize the cosmos we observe, and that takes us back to the large-scale electric circuitry we discussed. Birkeland currents.
These galactic transmission lines.
Imagine the galaxy not as a collection of isolated islands of matter, but as a giant electrical circuit board. Birkeland currents are the massive, invisible, twisted cables of electric current that span vast cosmic distances, channeling energy across galaxies. The theory posits that stars and planets form along these currents via the Z-pinch effect and are powered externally.
The electric sun model.
Yes, which directly contradicts the standard model's reliance on internal nuclear fusion for stellar energy.
And if we look at the effects of these currents closer to home, we return to the concept of electric discharge machining, EDM. We talked about the Grand Canyon earlier, but let's elaborate on how they apply this concept to the entire solar system.
EDM is the hypothesis that the vast majority of geological and planetary features, craters on the Moon, Mars, Earth, are not asteroid impact sites, but rather scars caused by massive high-energy interplanetary lightning.
And they argue this explains phenomena that traditional impact theory struggles with.
Exactly. For instance, the EDM strikes leave clean, steep-walled, circular craters because the electrical energy vaporizes the material instantly. Furthermore, they explain the formation of crater chains, aligned craters that seem to defy random impact as a result of currents running in lines across the surface.
This sounds incredibly cohesive within its own framework, tying physics and mythology together seamlessly, but we must now provide the mainstream rebuttal. This is a crucial context check because established science astrophysics, geology, orbital mechanics firmly and entirely rejects the electric universe model and, by extension, the Saturn theory.
This raises the essential question: why does the established scientific community discount these ideas? And the reasons aren't political, but rooted in basic physical laws, mathematical modeling, and empirical evidence.
Let's start with the math on orbital dynamics.
The primary conflict is orbital stability. Standard celestial mechanics relies on extensive computer simulations based on Newtonian and Einsteinian gravity. These simulations show conclusively that the proposed polar configuration is inherently and violently unstable.
So it wouldn't last.
It would scatter or crash within a geological instant, not survive for thousands of years. No electromagnetic force proposed by the EU has ever been quantitatively demonstrated to override gravity on this macro scale without violating basic laws of energy conservation.
And what about the evidence we have here on Earth, specifically regarding the catastrophic timeline?
Geologically, there is a severe conflict. We have continuous ice core records from Antarctica and Greenland that extend back hundreds of thousands of years. These cores contain layered records of atmospheric composition, volcanic activity, annual temperature fluctuations.
And they show what?
They offer absolutely no evidence of the radical global thermal disruption or the atmospheric changes, like the sudden massive thermal shift required to end the Purple Dawn that would have occurred around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. The paleoclimatic record is simply too stable to support the theory's catastrophic event.
There is also a major disconnect on fundamental cosmology.
Yes, the cosmological alienation is vast. The EU model requires rejecting the standard cosmological model entirely. EU theorists dispute the Big Bang and the primary mechanism for measuring cosmic distance. They often subscribe to hypotheses, like those from Halt and Arp, arguing that redshift is intrinsic to a star's age or electrical charge, not a measure of its velocity moving away from us.
So they're basically rewriting everything.
By rejecting the relationship between redshift and distance, they move the entire model into a cosmological space entirely separate from the standard metrics of astrophysics. In essence, the EU model requires a complete rewrite of physics, geology, and cosmology, which mainstream science finds unjustifiable given the overwhelming gravitational and nuclear evidence.
We now transition from the physics and mythology into the most controversial and challenging aspect of the theory, the sociological fallout. We're moving from the cosmic event to the psychological and economic consequences. This is where the name Saturn Death Cult truly originates.
The shift is entirely one of perspective. The collapse of the Saturn system, the disappearance of the Great Father in the North, was experienced by early humanity as a profound, world-ending trauma. The abandonment. This left a psychological void and a fear of recurrence.
And out of that fear, a new priestly caste allegedly rose to power.
Exactly. A specialized caste of survivors emerged, the priesthood, who claimed to possess the hidden knowledge, the occult, of the true astronomical history. Their power was based on fear. They asserted that the gods had left or were angry and demanded ritualistic obedience and appeasement to stabilize the heavens.
So the elite secret is simply the accurate astronomical history of the solar system, which they conceal through allegory.
Precisely. The core of the conspiracy is the deliberate obfuscation of this knowledge. The elite know the gods are planets that once ruled the sky, while the masses are taught to worship them as personified, ethereal deities. This keeps the technical, dangerous knowledge hidden.
This knowledge is then allegedly used to create the modern financial system. Let's look at the claim regarding the transition from the Golden Age economy to the age of debt.
Our sources argue that in the hyper-productive, temperate environment of the Purple Dawn, there was virtually no scarcity. So there was no need for money, trade, or coercive labor. It was a literal Garden of Eden, a world without debt.
But after the cataclysm and the rise of scarcity, the priesthood introduced the concept of debt.
And this debt was profound. It was framed not as a commercial obligation, but as humanity's eternal spiritual debt owed to the gods for their very survival after the Celestial War. It was a system designed to establish hierarchical control.
And money itself was not initially for trade.
No. The sources claim the first money was purely ritualistic. It was minted as talismans bearing the images of the planetary gods, gold for the sun or Saturn, silver for the moon or Venus. The act of holding a coin was a ritual acknowledgement of the debt owed to the temple.
Now for the most profound and disturbing connection. Saturn is Kronos, the god of time.
This is where the theory becomes truly chilling. The common maxim, time is money, is taken literally. The theory asserts that the modern debt-based financial system, controlled by this Saturnian elite, is specifically designed to steal the time, the life force, the productive energy of the population through the mechanism of usury.
Charging interest on that debt.
By controlling the currency supply and enforcing perpetual debt, they control the time and energy of the entire planet, ensuring humanity remains perpetually enslaved to the god of time, Saturn.
This system of control culminates in the final, darkest aspect: ritual sacrifice and modern warfare. If the cult is reenacting the doomsday, what is the ultimate logic behind shedding blood?
The celestial cataclysm involved the violent death of the god and the spilling of celestial blood, interpreted as plasma or red dust visible in the sky. The logic is that the priesthood, or the modern elite who serve this Saturnian entity, believe that by ritualistically shedding blood on Earth, the microcosm, they can stabilize the heavens, the macrocosm.
So this theory interprets modern wars not as geopolitical struggles over resources, but as engineered mass ritual sacrifices. That's a massive claim.
That is the direct interpretation the theory presents. They claim conflicts are deliberately engineered by the elite to generate immense fear, terror, and death, which acts as loosh.
We need to define loosh. It's an unusual term.
Loosh, in this esoteric context, is described as a form of negative psychic energy, a kind of energy food that's generated by intense human suffering, fear, and death.
And this loosh feeds.
What? The theory posits that this loosh feeds the Saturnian egregore, or the controlling interdimensional entities linked to the system.
And an egregore is.
For our purposes, an egregore is an autonomous psychic entity that exists purely in the collective mind. It's created and sustained by the thoughts and emotional energy of a large group of people. The Saturnian system, in this theory, has manifested an egregore that requires constant emotional energy loosh to maintain its influence and matrix of control over Earth.
We've tracked the theory from a cosmic event to a psychological trauma, and now to a massive sociological conspiracy based on debt and ritual. This final investigative section details the claims that the Saturnian priesthood's symbols and rituals are secretly embedded everywhere in modern institutions, media, and even religion, the hidden signs of the controlling matrix.
The visual signature of this controlling force is allegedly the black cube symbolism, and this symbol is tied to a verifiable astronomical discovery.
Remind us of the discovery.
In the 1980s, the Voyager probes, and later Cassini, discovered a persistent six-sided hexagonal storm vortex centered precisely over Saturn's north pole. Theorists claim this feature was known to the ancients and is the ultimate, inescapable symbol of the planet.
How does a hexagon become a cube? That requires a jump in geometry.
Through dimensional geometry. A hexagon with 6 sides is presented as the 2D projection of a 3D cube, with its 6 faces. Therefore, the cube is interpreted as the ultimate esoteric symbol of Saturn.
Representing what?
Often representing the prison of matter, the limiting structure that binds humanity to this fallen world of time and debt.
The theory then engages in aggressive and frankly highly controversial syncretism by linking the black cube directly to major Abrahamic religions as evidence of crypto-Saturnian cults operating openly. I have to say, this is a vast generalization.
It is, but proponents view this as proof of the hidden unity of the Saturnian elite. They point to the Kaaba in Mecca, which is a massive black cube that serves as the central focal point for Islamic prayer.
And in Judaism?
They point to the tefillin boxes of Judaism, small black cubes worn during prayer, and they interpret the Christian cross geometrically as an unfolded cube.
The implication being that billions of people across 3 major faiths are unknowingly or knowingly worshiping the black sun of Saturn.
That is the central provocative claim, that the core symbols of global religion are encoded markers left by the original Saturnian priesthood. These symbols, they argue, maintain the psychic link and the underlying Saturnian control structure.
Let's review some of the other ubiquitous alleged Saturnian symbols they claim are hidden in plain sight, starting with the most recognizable feature of the planet.
The ring swoosh is seen as a stylized depiction of Saturn's rings. This is allegedly referenced in corporate logos intended to subtly signal the control of the Saturnian elite. They cite examples like the Nike swoosh or even elements of the NASA logo.
The eye appears again in modern symbolism.
That is the polar alignment itself, Saturn, Venus, Mars. Examples cited are ubiquitous. The CBS logo, and most infamously the Eye of Providence, featured on the Great Seal of the USA and the dollar bill.
And the 6-sided geometry from the North Pole manifests as the hexagram.
The hexagram, or 6-pointed star, is tied directly to the hexagonal geometry of Saturn's North Pole. This symbol links directly to the Star of David, Masonic symbols, and even the shape of certain sheriff's badges. They claim these are encoded markers of the ruling Saturnian elite.
The theory also points to specific occult groups as the literal keepers of knowledge today, the direct descendants of the original priesthood.
They cite the Fraternitas Saturni, FS, a real, active German occult order founded in 1926. The FS focuses explicitly on Saturnian gnosis, a path to enlightenment through exploring darkness and chaos. And crucially, they worship an autonomous entity they call GOTOS.
So while they're a fringe group in reality, the theory elevates them to a central role in this global structure.
Yes, as actively working to maintain the control matrix. And there's a strange but specific link to modern ufology via the Council of Nine.
Right, from the 1950s.
Yes, through figures like Andrija Puharich, who claimed to channel highly advanced interdimensional entities referred to as the Nine. These entities claim to be the Egyptian Ennead and the controllers of human evolution. The Saturn theory interprets these 9 as the specific planetary intelligences of the Saturnian system, manipulating human events from behind the veil.
Finally, let's look at how the theory interprets modern popular culture, specifically movies and media, as soft disclosure or predictive programming. The idea that the elite are telling us the truth, just disguised as fiction.
Stanley Kubrick's 2001. A Space Odyssey is a central, pivotal text in this theory. The iconic monolith, a perfect black rectangle, is allegedly a representation of the Saturnian screen, or cube, the prison of matter.
And the theory emphasizes that the original destination of the mission was Saturn, not Jupiter.
Exactly. It was Saturn in the Arthur C. Clarke book, but was changed to Jupiter in the film, allegedly a deliberate act of censorship by the elite to hide the truth about the planet's significance.
And the star child at the end, representing human evolution.
It represents the next guided evolution of man, suggesting human history and biological progress are entirely overseen and influenced by the Saturnian intelligence.
Other modern cultural touchstones are also included, like the cult classic Twin Peaks.
The famous Black Lodge in Twin Peaks, with its distinctive red drapes and chevron floors, is seen as a direct symbolic representation of Saturnian geometry, the chevrons being linked to the hexagonal poles and the control matrix, the interdimensional prison from which entities manipulate reality on Earth.
And The Lord of the Rings provides the perfect classic myth retelling repackaged for a modern audience.
Absolutely. Sauron, whose influence is represented by the omnipresent all-seeing eye, ruling from the black land of Mordor with his one ring, the ring of Saturn that binds the lesser kingdoms, is interpreted as a direct, modern fantasy retelling of the Saturn mythos and its controlling power over the world.
We have completed a truly massive amount of material. We started with a purple, stable sky held rigid by electricity, moved through a planetary war that shattered the world, found that trauma fossilized in myth, realized that the current financial system is allegedly a debt owed to the gods of time, and discovered that the symbol of a black cube is supposedly embedded everywhere from religion to pop culture.
So what does this all mean?
The Saturn Death Cult theory, in its totality, functions as a powerful, singular, grand unified theory of conspiracy. It manages to offer a single, coherent narrative that claims to explain everything from the shape of craters on Mars to the logo on a Nike shoe and the origins of your mortgage.
It is ultimately a kind of dark Gnosticism for the scientific age. It is. It fundamentally argues that the world we live in is a fallen world, not just metaphorically or morally, but astrophysically fallen, traumatized by the catastrophic collapse of a dead star system. The trauma is real, and the controllers are its descendants.
The theory posits that the Matrix is not science fiction. It's real. It is the frequency fence, symbolized by the ringed planet and the black cube, that binds us to a false reality of time, scarcity, and debt.
And this prison is allegedly maintained by the traumatized priesthood of that dead star, feeding off human suffering. Its true power, as we've seen, isn't in its scientific validity, which is heavily disputed, but in its mythopoetic density, its incredible ability to re-enchant the universe with a terrifying, hidden history.
The final provocative thought for you to consider is this. The theory's most challenging idea is the realization that history, religion, and science are all presented as masks for the same primordial trauma, the violent death of the Golden Age and the enduring, hidden reign of the Black Sun. It forces you to question every foundational narrative.
We encourage you to explore the original sources we've referenced today and decide for yourself whether this complex bricolage offers an illuminating alternative history or merely a fascinating synthesis of fringe science.
If you enjoyed diving this deep into the architecture of alternative cosmology and the theories that challenge our entire reality, make sure you hit that subscribe button. New deep dives are available every Tuesday and Friday, designed to get you well-informed quickly and thoroughly. We'll see you next time.